Okay, 1 o'clock Wednesday afternoon here in North Carolina. Wednesday, 1 o'clock. That means it's time for some world history study. So let's get everybody settled in here. World history study. We're going to get into some really controversial stuff today that I want to help you to understand how to think about because it's really difficult. And you're going to be challenged on this stuff your whole life. So I'd like to get into it and help you to learn how to think about some of this ancient history stuff where we've got biblical stories and things like that. And today people think that they're false or they think that they're just fables and things like that. And I want to talk about those things and how we can think reasonably about this stuff so we don't embarrass ourselves and at the same time so we don't allow ourselves to be discouraged by arguments that really don't make any sense, even though they may look impressive on the surface. So we're going to get into ancient Sumerian culture. We're going to talk a little bit about Noah and the flood. We're going to talk about the races of human civilizations on Earth, take a little look at geography and a bunch of other stuff. So we've got a lot to talk about, and I'll try to make this helpful and not too complicated. I just want to start by asking you to think about my situation when I was 19, 20 years old. I want to share my own background a little bit. I was a college student at a state university in New Jersey, Rutgers University. I was sort of becoming a Christian at the time. I was reading the Bible. I was learning lots of stuff. I had very strong faith, but I didn't have a good education. I didn't know much. And so I started to take classes at a state university that I thought would help me to learn things like history and philosophy, stuff like that. And my professors were usually atheists or people who didn't like Christianity. So here I am reading the Bible, starting to learn about Christian faith, and I'm in these classes with these professors who just take shots at Christianity all the time. And I had to go through this day after day after day, month after month, for a couple of years. So as my Christian faith was developing, I was always being challenged by these professors. And I was a good student, so my professors liked me, and I had good relationships with my professors, but they always targeted me. They would even pick on me in class and challenge me and stuff like that. So I was always forced to fight about every single topic, every issue. The professors would ask me what I think and things like that, and then we'd start these giant debates and all this stuff. So my Christian faith developed in a sort of like an arena where everything I said was challenged and criticized. And there were many days when I went home from class and felt confused and frustrated, and I didn't know what to do because I didn't have the answers. And so I always had to answer these questions. And what was helpful is I had so much exercise in dealing with all these criticisms and questions and attacks and stuff that I learned how to deal with them. I really learned how to deal with them. And I learned what their weaknesses were, and I learned how to manage that kind of stuff. And it actually made me very comfortable, very strong. So today, I'm very comfortable dealing with those questions because I had to develop my Christian beliefs and ideas in the presence of constant challenges and questions and criticism. And it was very difficult. So what I'd like to talk about today are some of these issues, because these are the kinds of issues that I got attacked on all the time. I'd always get questions, oh, so, you believe the Bible, you believe that, there was a flood and Noah was in the ark and the ark was full of animals and you get all these questions, and they're very difficult to answer. And many times Christians answer those questions in ways that are not wise, and then they actually do lose the arguments and they make Christianity look dumb, and that's their own fault. This is very common, and it actually causes these unbelievers to think that they're right, which is a terrible thing if you think about it. Imagine being responsible for actually causing unbelievers to believe that they're right because your explanation was dumb and you made the Bible or Christian faith look silly. So we've got to be careful in these things. And when I studied, I majored in classics and ancient history. So I spent a lot of time studying all of this ancient history stuff. Okay, the ancient Middle East, ancient Israel, ancient Egypt, ancient Persia and Babylon and Assyria. That's what I really focused on. And then I got into Greek and Roman history and stuff like that too. But I spent a lot of time focusing on ancient history, which is very boring and very difficult, just because I knew that it was important and I wanted to be able to answer all of these questions people ask me all the time. So I studied ancient history. All right. So when it comes to these questions about like Noah's flood and all this kinds of stuff, I know all the arguments. I know the kind of stuff that you're going to hear from people. I know what the Bible teaches. I know what the church teaches. And I think that I can help you to learn how to deal with these things in an intelligent way where you don't get yourself in trouble or embarrass yourself by saying things you shouldn't say. All right. So let's just talk about some of these things. What we're going to talk about today is last week we talked about prehistory. If you were here last week, we talked about prehistory. Don't bother looking at the screen yet. Just listen for a minute. Last week we talked about the theory of prehistoric man. And if you didn't attend the class last week, I recommend you watch that video. We talked about the theory that men existed on Earth before there was any historical evidence that men existed on Earth, before there was any written history available. And I talked about that prehistoric theory, that it's a theory. It's not fact, it's a theory. And I explained that it doesn't really make much sense to say that men lived on Earth for thousands and thousands of years with no writing or anything like that, because we have no evidence that men ever did that. The theory that men lived like cavemen for a long time, right? We kind of joke about, Unga Bunga caveman culture. We looked at the Bible last week during our class, and we saw that the Bible actually teaches that from the very beginning, men were practicing the arts of music, and they were working with metal, making all kinds of tools and instruments and things like that. We already have marriage established in the Garden of Eden right from the beginning. So the Bible does not teach this idea that men lived like cavemen for thousands and thousands of years, eating bugs out of their hair like monkeys and stuff like that. The Bible doesn't say anything like that. The Bible says that man was created. Man was always dignified and honorable. He was made in the image of God. He was the greatest of all the creatures. We have no reason biblically to believe that man existed as a caveman or that man evolved from animals or anything like that. And you're going to be challenged with that stuff all the time because people are going to tell you that scientists have proven this and historians have proven this. And I just want to tell you up front that those claims are false. To say that someone has proven something requires evidence. And as an individual thinking person, if there's one thing that I can beg you to commit to in your life, one thing that I beg you to commit to, it's to never accept anyone's claim that something has been proven someplace else by somebody else. If anybody talks to you like that, you have to learn to ignore those people. Scientific evidence is direct evidence. So if you can't be shown the evidence, if you can't access the evidence, if you don't know the evidence, if you don't see the proof, you cannot pretend that your thoughts are scientific, because that's not what science is. So anytime that someone says to you, oh, scientists, anytime they talk like that, historians know that, scientists have proven that, that's not how science works. That's not how history works. And again, I beg you in your life to never let anyone talk to you like that and make you think that you have to accept something because they claim that somebody somewhere proved what they're saying is true. That's just not how science works. If you don't have the evidence, if you don't have access to the evidence, then you cannot make any scientific claim about anything, because science requires evidence. And most of the people talking about things, they don't have any evidence for the stuff they talk about. They simply want it to be true, and they believe that somewhere someone has proven what they want to be true to actually be true. But that's not science. It's simply their beliefs. It's their own opinion, their own judgment. But they present it as if it's scientific, and most people get deceived by stuff like that. If you don't have the evidence, and if the person talking to you doesn't have the evidence, then they should not be talking about what anyone else has proven or what historians know and all that kind of stuff. You have to learn to ignore that kind of talk, because people can say anything and try to bully you by referring to scientists and historians when they have no evidence for those things, and they've never seen any evidence for those things. They simply believe that they're true, and they claim that scientists have proven it. So that's my first rule for thinking about all this kind of stuff. The Bible, stories in the Bible, Noah's flood, all of these different issues. You'll find that these ideas and these teachings are criticized by people who pretend that they have scientific evidence that proves that they're not true or something like that, and they don't have any such evidence. So just learn to challenge those claims. If somebody says, oh, science has proven this, say to those people, show me the evidence. Where can I actually see the evidence? And if they can't show you the evidence, then you need to call them out and tell them to stop talking about science and evidence if they actually have no evidence, because they don't have any evidence. And we'll look at a couple examples today as we talk about this. But people love to try to pressure Christians into thinking that their beliefs have been proven false by science or by history, and it's simply not true. And if it was true, we would see the evidence, and there never is any evidence. It's always talk about how some scientist someplace or some historian someplace proved this or that, but there's never any actual evidence, because there is no evidence. So learn to not take those claims seriously, and know that you have the right to ask to see the evidence. And if they can't provide you with the evidence, you have the right to say baloney. I'm not going to listen to you tell me what has been proven. Show me the evidence. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be talking about science or history or anything like that, because you're just making stuff up. So when we get into this ancient history, and I'm talking about the earliest human civilizations, the main source we have for information on this stuff is, guess what? The Bible. It's the main source that we have for this information. What's funny is some of the information of the Bible, all of the scientists and historians will accept, because we wouldn't even know where to begin in the study of ancient history if we didn't have the Bible, because the Bible is the oldest and most complete source of historical information that exists. We wouldn't even know where to begin if we didn't have the Bible. And scientists and historians, well, they'll accept some things from the Bible and then decide that they're not going to accept other things, which makes no sense. And it reveals the real problem. And again, the reason why people want to reject the Bible is very simple. The reason why people want to reject the Bible is because the Bible makes moral demands on our lives. The Bible makes moral demands. If God created the world, if God created us, if God created everything that exists, then he has the right to tell us what to do. That's why people don't want creation to be true, because if there is a God who created the world and everything is his, then he has the right to tell us what to do. And what he says is all that matters. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what we want. If God created the world, then he has the right to tell us to do whatever he wants. And that's what makes it right or wrong. Everything is his. That moral idea is the reason why people don't want religion to be true. They don't want the Bible to be true, because if the Bible's true, then they have to obey God's commands, or God threatens to punish them. And they simply don't want that to be true. So there's a reason why people don't want the Bible to be true, because it's a moral book. It ends up teaching us moral lessons and giving us commandments that we have to obey. So obviously, people don't want it to be true. Now, when we look at the Old Testament and the Bible, we read about the creation of the world, and we read about the Garden of Eden, and we wonder, where in the world is the Garden of Eden? So let's just take a look at a map here. The simple answer to that question is we don't know exactly where the Garden of Eden is, and that's not a surprise, because the same Bible that teaches us about the Garden of Eden also tells us that there was a flood that destroyed the whole world. So if I tell you that, Mary and Bob lived in a house, and they lived in this house, and then there was a flood, and the whole earth was destroyed, and after the flood, we don't know where Mary and Bob's house was, that's not proof that Mary and Bob never existed. It actually makes perfect sense why we can't find Mary and Bob's house, because I just told you there was a worldwide flood that destroyed everything. So that makes perfect sense why it would be difficult for us to know where the Garden of Eden is. There was a flood that destroyed the world. So there's no problem with those two things going together. What we do know about the Garden of Eden, if you read the Bible story, is that it tells us that there were some rivers that flowed out of Eden, okay? There were rivers that flowed out of Eden. Now, let me ask you this, and you can answer this in the chat. If rivers flowed out of Eden, was Eden above the rivers or below the rivers? If rivers flowed out of the Garden of Eden, then where would the Garden of Eden have been? In a highland or in a lowland? Yeah, above, right? It's common sense, simple. So when the Bible tells us that the land of Eden had rivers flowing out of it, we know that the Garden of Eden was in a place where the land was higher because water could flow out of it, okay? So that's a helpful clue to try to figure out where this thing is. The other thing that's helpful about the Garden of Eden is it tells us the names of some of the rivers that flowed out of the garden. There were 4 rivers that flowed out of the garden. 2 of them, the names of those rivers, we don't necessarily know where they are, and there are theories about what rivers they might be and things like that. But 2 of the rivers actually kept their names and still exist. Those 2 rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates River. So in the very early books of Genesis, let me just go there real quick. Sorry, I have to scroll through this. It's kind of annoying, but if we go back to the Garden of Eden, we read about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and all this. Let me find where this is. I'm not too smart when it comes to finding stuff when I'm in the middle of a class. Here we go. Genesis chapter 2, we read, a river went out of the place of pleasure to water paradise, and it divided into 4 heads. The name of one is Fison. The name of another one is Gihon. The name of the other is Tigris. And the last one over here is Euphrates. So we're told the names of these 4 rivers. The Fison and the Gihon, well, we're told where that is. It runs around the land of Ethiopia. We're not necessarily sure what those are, but these other 2 rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, well, they still have the same name today. And we can go on Google Earth and we can zoom in over here in the Middle East, and we can find 2 rivers. I don't want to zoom in too much, but you can see the rivers here. Here's one of them, this river here. That's the Euphrates River. And this river up here to the north that runs around like this, that's the Tigris River. So we still have the Tigris River and the Euphrates River on Earth. And we didn't make up their names. That's what they've always been called. So we have reason to believe that those are the two of the rivers that are mentioned in the book of Genesis. And we're told that they flow out of the land of Eden, right? We're told they flowed out from the land of Eden. And we just said that the land of Eden must be uphill from these rivers. Now, if we actually trace these rivers, and let's go ahead and do that a little bit. If we trace these rivers, and we can trace them here, see if I can get this to work a little bit. Let me 3D this thing. So here we go. We go from the Persian Gulf down here. This is where these rivers empty out. They pour out into the Persian Gulf. But if we trace, let's say we trace the Euphrates River, it goes up here, down around here, and then it comes up here and makes a left turn, comes up around here, and we can just trace it and trace it and trace it. And as we trace it, it continues going uphill and uphill and uphill, and it goes up here, up into these mountains, okay? It goes up into these mountains. So these two rivers, the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, they come from up here, up in the north, where there are mountains, okay? So this area up here is a mountainous area, and it's where these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, come from. So if we're just reading the Bible, looking at a map and reasoning about what could be possible, the only possible answer for where the Garden of Eden could be is somewhere up here in these mountains, somewhere in the north where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers come from. It's got to be up there, okay? That's the only place it could possibly be. Now, we can't guess beyond that where exactly it is. And maybe in history, people did guess at where it was, and there may be some theories about where it is, but it's good enough for us to know that somewhere up here in the north, above the Tigris and the Euphrates River, well, that's probably where the Garden of Eden was, okay? So that's good enough for us to know. And it makes sense that it might be destroyed and it'd be impossible to find, because the same Bible tells us that there was a flood that washed everything out. So there's no problem with that. So if we look at the world map again, and we had to guess where the Garden of Eden was, we'd guess somewhere up here to the north of the Tigris and the Euphrates River, up in the mountains, up in the hills north of this area, okay? Now, when we come to world history and we come in world chronology to the first event in world chronology, we have the creation of the world, okay? We say around 4000 BC. That's the earliest evidence of human life and civilization on Earth. Anything older than that is theory. No matter what anybody says, no matter what any scientist says, no matter what any historian says, anything that's dated older than 4,000 or 5,000 BC is theory. We start with this date of the creation of the world based on what we can know at 4,000 BC. After that, in chronology, tell me, what's the first major event in world chronology after the creation of the world? What's the first major event? The Sumerian civilization, not the flood. Flood doesn't come yet. After the creation of the world, the first human civilization that we know about is called the Sumerian civilization. The Sumerian civilization. And what's the date? What date is given to the Sumerian civilization? What's the date in world chronology? 3,500, 3,600, 3,500. Good. 3,500 is the date, okay? And of course, that's an estimate. We don't have a pinpoint date. These are ancient times. 3,500 is the first date, the first sign that we have of human civilization. Where do we get this evidence from? If you've studied world chronology, what causes us to say that there was a Sumerian civilization in 3,500 BC? Where do we get that idea from? Why do we say that the first civilization was in Sumeria. What do we find there? What do we find there? And we're talking about real history here. We're talking about evidence of civilization, evidence. What do we find there? Artifacts, maybe, ruins, maybe. That's really not, nope, not ruins, not ruins. Gavin, Hazelbarths are getting there. What we find there is writing. That's the real sign of human civilization. Okay, we find writing. We find signs of written records. Very good. Okay, we find written records in ancient Sumeria. That's the first sign we have that human beings are living. And there's a society of human beings. We have written records because human beings are rational creatures. They communicate. They have language. One of the very first things Adam did in the Garden of Eden was start naming things. And then think about it. If Adam is naming things, if he's giving all the animals and plants names and things like that, well, he's got to teach. You should be able to see the map. Can you see the map? Just give me a heads up real quick. Yes, you can see the map. All right. So I'm not sure. I know it's on my side. Looks like some people can see it. If Adam is naming all these things, and then Adam has a child, Adam is going to need to teach all of the names of these things to his child. And then if his child has another child, they're going to have to teach the names of all these things to that child. So eventually somebody's going to say, hey, we should probably write these things down because there are names for things and we're making the names. We should probably write them down. We should probably start writing things down. We should probably start writing down that Adam was the father of Cain and Abel, and then Seth was the father of such a. We should probably set these things down because they're going to be important in the future. We're going to have to know where people came from. So it's reasonable to expect that human beings would quickly begin writing things down. And when we look at Sumerian civilization, we find that that's what the evidence shows. We have people writing things down, keeping written records. Just follow me here. You don't even need to look at the map. So you're just not paying attention to what I'm saying, talking about the map that you don't even need to look at right now. We're going to have written records because we're going to die and we're going to want to pass information on and keep track of things. So we're going to need human records. And in Sumerian civilization, we find human records from the very beginning. Okay, so any talk about cavemen, men living with no language, men evolving from monkeys, and those are theories. And I'm not going to disrespect the theories because it's perfectly fine to make theories, but we have to be honest and admit that they're theories. Okay, they're theories that need to be proven. They're not theories that need to be believed. They're not theories that need to be accepted or trusted. That's not what theories are. Theories need to be proven. And if nobody can prove them, then they're just theories, and we don't need to pay much attention to them. And if somebody claims that they have been proven, well, then show us the evidence, because we don't have access to that evidence. Therefore, we have no reason to accept the theory. But we learned that the first civilization is Sumeria, okay? Now, where is Sumeria? Well, Sumeria is down here. It's in this area on the Euphrates River, okay? Down on the Euphrates River is where the Sumerian civilization was located. So it's not surprising, if we look at a map, if we just look at the world map, if we identify, let's say, Eden someplace up here, and then we ask, well, where would civilization begin? We can look at places and see where civilization would begin. People would start to move to try to find the best possible land they could after they were driven out of Eden, which the Bible tells us. So they weren't allowed to stay in Eden. They were driven out of Eden. And where would they go? Well, it would make the most sense that they would start to follow the rivers rather than wandering out into the middle of a desert. They would probably follow the rivers stay close to the rivers because the rivers give them water and food and things like that. They would probably stay close to the rivers and move along the rivers until they eventually found a great place to live. Well, if we walk down the rivers, we can see that these rivers lead us through desert land. So they're not going to stop here in the desert. But if they kept going, they would get to an area where in between the rivers, there was fertile land. And we find this area here, and it makes perfect, reasonable sense why people would move from the area of Eden down along the rivers and eventually settle in this land south between the Euphrates and the Tigris River. What's that land called between the Tigris and Euphrates River? What's that land called? Who knows? No, not the Fertile Crescent. That's not right. No, not Sumeria. Sumeria is just a part. James Bates got it. Good. No, not the Nile Valley. Come on. This is the land of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia is simply a word that means the land between, or the land in the middle of the rivers. So you can look at a world map and see this valuable area. It's green in the middle of deserts. And to the north over here, you can see there's sort of lines. Those are mountains. So up to the northeast, that's wasteland, just mountains. Down to the south, there's just desert. But in the middle here, we've got this fertile land in between these two rivers. So if the story of the Garden of Eden and creation is true, it would make perfect sense that men would move down these rivers and eventually find this lush, fertile land between the rivers. So the biblical story and the actual historical evidence go together and they make sense, which gives us reason to trust that the scriptures are in fact true. They go along with the historical evidence. And again, if we were to take the Bible and throw it away, how would historians even begin to study world history? They wouldn't even know where to start. And this is part of the problem. They start with biblical stories, and then as soon as they start to think they're smart, they then start talking about rejecting biblical stories. But the whole entire study begins with biblical stories. So we have the account of the land of Eden, man being put out of the land of Eden, being forced to go someplace else. Why would man, let me ask you this, why would man not go north? Why would it not be reasonable for man to go north? Anybody have an idea? Why would it not be reasonable for men to go north? Very good, very good. It's cold, okay? So it would be reasonable for man not to go north of Eden, but to move to the south because it's more comfortable to live in warmer areas. So again, reason supports the biblical story that men would go out of Eden and they would likely move south following the rivers, not go up through the mountains into the north. That doesn't make any sense. So we would expect to move from Eden south along the rivers, and eventually they'd find the jackpot, which was this area called Mesopotamia between the rivers further south, where the first human civilization is found, where the first records of any human civilization are found. And that's where the Sumerian civilization develops. So that what the historical evidence tells us perfectly agrees with what the Bible tells us as where human life started, what happened to human beings after life started. That story in Genesis perfectly agrees with the historical evidence, which shows us the first civilization developing in Mesopotamia, in Sumeria. Okay? So again, when people say, oh, the history, this, the science, the evidence, no, that's false. The actual historical evidence completely supports the biblical story, the biblical history of what happened at the beginning of the world. The very first evidence we have of human civilization is along the Euphrates River, south of the land of Eden, in the middle of the world, what we would call the Middle East today. So the actual historical evidence supports the biblical history. Okay, that's actual historical evidence, not prehistoric theories, not evolutionary theories about where the world came from and how the continents moved and all. That's all theoretical. If we look at the actual evidence and stick to the evidence, it perfectly agrees with what the Bible tells us. So we read about Adam and Eve. They have children. They're bad because they're fallen and they've wandered away from God. Cain kills Abel. All kinds of sin starts to break out. They start to reproduce and have kids, and there's more sin and all kinds of trouble. And finally, God says he's going to destroy the earth. He's going to destroy mankind. He's basically going to start over and punish these men because their sin is getting out of hand. So he calls Noah and he tells Noah that he's going to destroy the earth with a flood. And he tells Noah to build an ark. And we have this story that sounds crazy when you think about it, but God tells this man named Noah, who's a good man, he tells him to build an ark, a giant ship, and that he's going to gather all the animals into that ship, close up that ship, flood the earth, and basically start all over again. So this is our biblical story. And the question is, do we have historical evidence that would support this story? And that's what I want to talk about next. So first of all, the first question is it's not, building the ark is not a big deal, right? I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years after the first man was created. We have Noah living, and Noah was likely a Sumerian man, right? Probably living in this area somewhere, has access to wood and all that kind of stuff. He can build an ark. There's no problem with that. The challenging thing about the story of the ark is the animals, right? How in the world would animals, all these animals, have gotten onto the ark? And we can think about all kinds of crazy things, like would there be tigers on the ark and lions and all this kind of stuff? And we'd have to conclude that that all of the different species were included in the ark when the flood came. Now, if we ask a question like, it's pretty funny, actually. If we ask a question like, how could Noah possibly have gathered all of the animals into the ark, right? That seems like a reasonable question. How could he possibly? Just think how dumb that question is, though, because we're talking about a worldwide flood. Like, if we're telling you that God chose to create a worldwide flood to destroy the world, don't you think that the God who creates the flood and who created the animals could manage to get the animals together into a safe place? It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to accept the idea of a flood or to accept the idea of creation and then to imagine that getting animals onto a ship would be a difficult thing. If you accept the teaching of the creation of the world, anything else is easy to accept. So, this is what I mean when I say people will accept one thing and then object to another thing, which makes no sense. If God created the world, then everything is easy. So if the Bible tells us God did this, there's no problem accepting that if you already believe that he created the world. So the objections really don't make any sense. How could you accept that there's a worldwide flood and then complain about how animals can get on board of a ship? It doesn't make much sense. If you're going to reject the idea that the animals get on a ship, well, then reject the flood too, and reject creation too. Just reject everything, because it doesn't make sense to accept one thing and reject another because you just can't figure out how it works. Okay? Animals act crazy when disasters happen. Well, animals are in God's control, right? And we can find all kinds of stories through history where animals don't act crazy. And you can find stories like these things all the time. You can find stories where animals save people's lives, all kinds of crazy stories. Animals pull people out of fires. There's no way to explain these things, okay? There's no simple scientific answer. If you believe in creation, let's just keep this very, very simple. If you believe that God created the world out of nothing, there's no difficulty accepting anything else that God claims to do, Okay. If you accept creation, everything else is easy. Okay. So it makes no sense to object to this and not object to that. Doesn't make any sense. But anyway, we have this story that God caused a flood to destroy and punish all the sinful men upon the earth, and all the animals got destroyed as well. But God saved animals from each species and brought them together and saved them on the ark, so that after the flood, they could then go back out into the world and reproduce and fill the earth again from scratch. Okay. Now, let me say one thing. That's a very good argument against evolution, right? It's a very good argument against evolution to see that all of the species existed in the beginning of history, right? If evolution is true, then there shouldn't even have been any animals would be just mixed up and kooky all over the place, and we wouldn't even know what was what. We'd have like half tigers, half fish. There'd be all kinds of craziness all over the place. There's never any record of any kind of mixed species or developing species or anything like that. Even in the creation narrative, when God talks about creating the world, it says he created all of the animals, each according to its own kind. And that word in Latin, kind, is species. So the idea that species evolved can't possibly agree with what we read in the book of Genesis. So anyway, stick that feather in your hat. I want to talk about Noah. So Noah gets on a boat that God tells him to build. The animals somehow the animals are gathered together onto this boat, and we can trust, like Zoriana said before, God helped that to happen. That's not a crazy idea to think that God would help Noah to do what God told him to do. That's not unreasonable. So all the animals get on the boat, and a flood comes, kills all these people, wipes out civilization, and we're told that the earth is flooded, the waters rise higher than the mountains, and that eventually, after the flood ends and the waters start to go down, Noah lands in the ark in a mountain range. Who knows the place where Noah landed? What's the name of the place where the ark supposedly rested? Anybody know that? Yeah, those are some good guesses. Spelling's not exactly right. We've got some interesting ideas there. Spellings. Yeah, Ararat. 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 Okay. That's the name of the mountain in the Bible where we're told that the ark rested. Okay. Now, if we look at the map, let's look at the map. You can see there's a little red flag on the map here. That's Mount Ararat right there. So what do you notice about the place where the ark supposedly rested? What's something interesting about the place where the ark rested? Yeah, very good, Blaze. That's right. Very good, Gavin. All right. So if we look at where the ark supposedly rested, it looks like God sort of hit the reset button, took Noah away, probably from somewhere further south. Off the top of my head, I can't think of where Noah was actually from, if it says he's from Sumeria or not. But God basically hit reset, punished the sinful men, took Noah and his family and the animals, put them in the ark, flooded the earth, brought them back up north. The flood stopped, the waters drained away, and Noah was planted back where man started from, up in the north above the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. That makes perfect sense. Okay? Makes perfect sense. Now, it leads us to the interesting question, right? So if we traveled to Mount Ararat and climbed up Mount Ararat, would we find the Ark of Noah? Will we find the Ark there? What's a good argument for why we would not find the Ark? Why would we likely not find the Ark if we went and looked for it? It broke down. It was a long time ago. Yeah, it was made out of wood, right? Give us a break. It doesn't make much sense to say we're going to go look for the ark. We're going to go look for this wooden ark 5,000 years later, as if the wood should still be there. So it doesn't make too much sense that we would go there and find the ark. Of course, some crazy people say that they've seen it and things like that, but our story is not dependent on anybody finding the ark. It's a wooden boat, right? There's no reason why it would last forever. But the story of the ark and where the ark ends up and things like that makes sense. Makes sense that they basically end up back where they started from. That makes sense. So that's the story of Noah's Ark and where Noah's Ark rests in the end. Now, real quickly, I want to get into what happens after the ark rests. Okay, let's look at this. It's down in Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10 is an important chapter. Keep this in your mind. Genesis chapter 10. When the flood ends and the ark comes to a rest and Noah and his family get out of the ark, they're the only people on earth. They're the only people on earth, okay? And it's Noah, his wife, their sons, their 3 sons, and their 3 sons' wives. So God saves male and female animals, and he also saves male and female people, okay? Once the flood is over and they get out of the ark, they're free to now reproduce and start the human race or the human family all over again. So you can think, if Noah has 3 sons, and we're told that their names are Sem, Ham, and Japheth, that's their names right there, the 3 sons of Noah. If Noah has 3 sons, that means that every single person in the whole world must come from either Sem, Ham, or Japheth, right? Everyone in the world today comes from those 3 men as their fathers, one of those 3 men. So we have this teaching in the Bible that all of the people of the world come from the 3 sons of Noah. And what's interesting is that when we go to secular history, this is our world history textbook. If we go to our secular history, and this is a theory, okay? Notice that this world history textbook teaches us that there are several races on earth. It talks about the black race, which are Africans. It talks about the yellow race, which are the Asian people, okay, Chinese, Japanese, and so on. And then it talks about the white race, Caucasian. If we read this history book, and again, this history book is great, but it's not perfect. It teaches us that there are these 3 different races, the black race, the yellow race, and the white race. And that makes some sense if we just look at people on the earth, but it doesn't agree with the biblical story of the sons of Noah. But what our history textbook does say is that the 3 sons of Noah were the fathers of the white race, okay? And I think this gets into a little bit of racism here. It basically is teaching us, I mean, think about this. If it's telling us that Sem, Ham, and the other group are the white race, where did the black race come from? If Sem, Ham, and Japheth are the white race, then according to this theory in our history book, where did the black race come from? Who can think of an answer to that? Where would the black race or the yellow race have come from if Sem, Ham, and Japheth were the sons of Noah? No, not son. Don't think black skin. That's not what I'm talking about. Maybe animals, okay? So we've got this dilemma, right? And we see in this textbook, there's a problem with this theory. If Sem, Ham, and Japheth were the good people who were saved, no, don't get into evolution. No one ever believed in evolution until the 1850s. So don't even waste your time talking about evolution. Evolution is a new theory. If Sem, Ham, and Japheth were the good people saved on the ark, then the yellow and the black people must be leftover bad people from before the flood. Okay. So this theory that there are three races of people, the white people come from Sem, Ham, and Japheth, and the other people, the black people and the yellow people, don't come from Noah's family, then they must be the wicked people who lived before the flood. Some of them must have survived and created these races. So that's not a very nice thing to say that there are black races and yellow races of people that were not included in the families of Sem, Ham, and Japheth, because that suggests that they would have been, the wicked people who were mostly destroyed. So if I was a black man and somebody told me that I was from the race not on the ark, I would find that offensive, right? And that's what this theory requires. Now, if we look at European history and you look at someone like Hitler, right? And you wonder, why was Hitler racist? Why did Hitler believe that other races needed to be killed? This is why Hitler believed other races needed to be killed. People like the Nazis believed that this theory of the races was true. They basically believed that the other races were like leftover wicked people that needed to be destroyed. So you can see where these crazy racist ideas come from, where someone thinks that and look at this, their white race is the supreme race. That's the people God actually wanted to keep, the good people. Those other people, they're just leftovers who, managed to survive the flood. Well, that's a very offensive racist idea. And that's where a lot of that racism came from in the early 1900s, because you had the theory of evolution, like I just mentioned, that was a new idea. And then you had this idea of these different races outside of the sons of Sem, Ham, and Japheth, which allowed for racist ideas to be developed and gave people the idea that they had the right to exterminate other races, because basically God missed them when he destroyed the world. And that's where that kind of racial genocide mindset comes from. Okay. That's right, Blaze. That's exactly the idea. Okay. And that's how those people like Hitler, that's how they thought, because they had this theory in their minds of the different races. Okay. So they thought it was perfectly okay to try to destroy those people that God basically missed in the flood. All right. So this theory in our textbook, this is part of the problem with this prehistory. Yeah, just stick with me here. Don't add more information. Part of the problem with this prehistoric theory is this prehistoric theory leads us into all kinds of crazy racist ideas that produce all kinds of problems. Think of how different the biblical message is. The biblical message teaches that every single person on earth is a son of Noah. The Bible teaches that every person on earth is a descendant of Noah. They're all members of a common family. Righteous, good Noah is their ancestor. Whether you're African or Asian or European, no matter what race you are, the Bible story teaches that we're all descendants of good Noah. That's a much better story. That's a much better explanation than Black people were leftovers who were not in the ark. Asian people were also sinners who failed to be destroyed by the flood. And white people are Noah's children. Okay, so you can see how the biblical story, stick with me here, the biblical story actually is a good message for all people. These other theories, they lead to all kinds of crazy ideas about different races and things like that. And they run into all kinds of trouble. So it's better for us to stick with the biblical story. Now, in this time, when this history book was made, this was an example of the know-it-all history people, the so-called scientists, explaining things and not believing what the Bible says. Well, you can go look at Adolf Hitler and see where this scientific theory led us in terms of racial behavior and things like that. But the scientists and the historians, they'll never take the blame when their theories lead to all kinds of terrible things. They just move on to new theories and pretend like nothing happened. But what actually happens in history is theories that go against what the Bible teaches, they always lead us to all kinds of bad things. Like the theory of evolution. If evolution is true, then we have a reason to believe that some people are higher animals than other people. Or if there's a person who kind of looks more like an ape, maybe he's not as evolved as a person who doesn't look like an ape. And you can see how that theory leads to all kinds of racist problems that are going to get ugly when they're allowed to be carried out. But the scientists and the historians, when they come up with these theories and they think they're so smart, and then those theories lead to all kinds of problems, they never take the blame for those theories. They just move on to a new theory. And that's one of the problems with science and history, okay? The biblical story tells us that we all come from one common ancestor. We're all part of the same family. And you can see that even the historians will accept that. They'll accept that there were 3 divisions of man, but they keep them separate from Blacks and Asians, which certainly isn't true, okay? So anyway, it's time for us to wrap up here. That's a lot of information. What I want you to come away with today is to understand that these theories, they may look innocent, but there's an important rule in life that ideas have consequences. Ideas have consequences. These theories are not always innocent. They often lead to some really terrible conclusions. And when you look at the world and you see things like abortion, and you wonder, where in the world would people get the idea that they should kill their children? Or you look at euthanasia, where people believe that old people should be put to death. Where do those ideas come from? Those ideas and practices come from theories that are presented as scientific theories. But those are the consequences of those theories. And like I said, the scientists who come up with these theories never take the blame for the terrible things that result from their theories. If we stick to the biblical accounts, to the biblical history, we'll be saved from all of those kinds of evil consequences of foolish theories that lead to all kinds of evil things: abortion, genocide, attempts to destroy races of people, to conquer other lands and just push people out because they're considered to be not as worthy as the other people. Those are some real problems that we run into, and they're always related to theories that don't come from the Bible or that speak against the Bible. Okay, so that's a lot of information. I've babbled now for an hour, so we need to wrap up here. I hope that's helpful. I hope it at least gets you thinking about these things. I want you to see that actual scientific and historical evidence always agrees with the Bible. Anytime people talk about evidence that proves the Bible wrong, you'll notice they never have that evidence. They can never show you that evidence. When we can actually look at evidence and see it, it always agrees with what the Bible tells us. So I hope that's helpful. That was my goal today. So think about this stuff. If you get any interesting ideas or new questions pop up, let me know. Post them on the student forums because they're interesting to talk about, and I'll talk about them with you, okay? So I hope that's helpful. That's all for today. If you've got any questions right now, you can ask them in the chat. Otherwise, you're free to go, and I'll catch you guys next week for some more history studies. God bless everybody.